Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're shifting our perspective to talk about something absolutely fascinating, linguistic anthropology. We're going to see how the language we use doesn't just passively describe the reality around us, it literally builds it. Every single time we open our mouths to speak, we're taking part in this massive, ongoing cultural project. So let's just dive right into the big question sitting at the heart of our exploration today. Does the language you speak actually change the way you see the world? We usually just think of language as, a vehicle, a way to get our pre-existing thoughts from point A to point B. But what if the vehicle itself actually determines the destination? To really grasp this, we've got to contrast how we usually study language. Formal linguistics is kind of like looking under the hood. It focuses on the abstract rules of grammar, the nuts and bolts. But linguistic anthropology, it looks at how we actually use communication as a lived cultural practice. It asks the deeper question, what is this communication actually doing out there in the real world, inside a specific community? Section 1. More than just grammar. Let's take a look at how early anthropologists completely flipped the script on this whole field. In foundational texts, like Alessandro Durante's work, scholars argue that language is a really powerful tool, not just a simple mirror reflecting reality. And this directly builds on early pioneers like Franz Boas. He famously rejected those old Eurocentric hierarchies and insisted, hey, languages have to be studied entirely on their own terms. The incredible author Toni Morrison absolutely nailed this sentiment when she described language as the measure of our lives. And honestly, that's the core obsession of linguistic anthropologists. They're not sitting around just analyzing abstract rules. They're out there studying real, messy, everyday encounters to understand the very measure of human existence. Section 2. Words that shape worlds. Let's zoom out to the macro level for a second to explore how vocabulary and structure influence human perception on a massive scale. The crucial takeaway here is that language is absolutely not a neutral medium. Enter the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, or linguistic relativity. It basically argues that our cognitive processes are deeply, inextricably tied to our native tongue. The linguistic framework we operate inside of actively shapes our day-to-day worldview. And look, this isn't just some dusty old theory. Contemporary empirical evidence totally backs this up. Modern studies are showing us how things like grammatical gender, whether a noun is masculine or feminine, or even how we interpret digital emojis today, fundamentally wire our cognitive experiences and cultural understandings. Let's look at a really concrete example, time. If your language treats time as a straight, linear progression from the past into the future, like we do in English, you're going to navigate the world one way. But if your language treats time as an interconnected, cyclical web, like certain indigenous languages do, well, your foundational cultural attitude toward reality is shaped completely differently. To actually map out these distinct ways of thinking, researchers use a really cool method called ethnosemantics. Instead of just imposing outside, foreign frameworks onto a culture, ethnosemantics models worldviews from the inside out. They do this by meticulously gathering the specific labels and categories a community naturally uses to organize its own environment. Section 3. Learning language, learning culture. Okay, let's step down from that macro worldview to the community level and see how caregivers socialize children into these specific realities. Research from the Center for Applied Linguistics makes it crystal clear. Long before a kid ever sets foot in a classroom, they are absorbing community norms. Through totally natural daily interactions with adults, they aren't just learning how to string a sentence together, they're learning who they are and exactly how they fit into the group. And it turns out there's absolutely no single universal way to raise a competent speaker. Just look at this contrast. In child-centered cultures, adults use simplified baby talk. They actively treat infants as conversational partners and try to interpret their babbles. But in situation-centered cultures, adults don't simplify their speech at all. The child is just expected to observe and learn to interpret adult language on their own. Both methods create totally fluent speakers, but they instill wildly different cultural norms. These early interactions literally dictate how grammar socializes the self. In North America, socialization often builds up an individualistic, autonomous self. But in many East Asian communities, like Korea, mastering the multiple levels of linguistic honorifics isn't just some grammar lesson. It is a vital social lesson that teaches you your exact interpersonal place and status within the society. Section 4. Identity, Power, and Performance. Now we're zooming way into the micro level to see how identity is constructed right there in face-to-face conversation. Based on the brilliant work of Mary Buchholz and others, we know that identity isn't just a static box you check on a census form. It's not fixed. Instead, identity emerges live in our discourse. Through principles like emergence, positionality, indexicality, relationality, and personalness, we are constantly positioning ourselves and relating to the people around us. Moment by moment, we are actively performing our identity through our words. But here's the catch. These local identity performances often crash head-on into big institutions. Shirley Bryce Heath's landmark ethnography, Ways with Words, shows exactly what happens when kids from Appalachian communities arrive at school with these rich, culturally specific storytelling styles. Tragically, standard education systems often misrecognize those brilliant differences as deficiencies, which leads to deep systemic inequalities.
Which brings us to code switching, or translanguaging. When multilingual speakers fluidly jump back and forth between languages, it is absolutely not a sign of confusion. Quite the opposite. It's a highly sophisticated, full-system communication strategy that people use to perform their identity, show cultural allegiance, and confidently navigate their way through different social worlds.
Similarly, language is never politically neutral. Researchers like Robin Lockoff and Deborah Tannen have shown us that power and gender dynamics are actively negotiated right there in our conversational styles. A lot of the time, misunderstandings don't actually stem from bad intentions. They stem from differing linguistic styles that were planted deep in our early childhood socialization.
Section 5. What we lose. Let's pull this all together and look at what this builds toward, because the reality for linguistic anthropology right now is incredibly urgent.
We are currently facing a truly devastating metric. Linguists estimate that a distinct human language dies roughly every 2 weeks. Just let the sheer speed of that loss sink in for a second. As documented in works like When Languages Die, preserving a language isn't just about saving some old vocabulary words for a dusty dictionary. When a language vanishes, we lose an entirely distinct way of understanding the world. We lose irreplaceable human cognitive diversity and unique environmental knowledge that simply cannot be translated into another tongue. It's gone forever. Ultimately, language is incredibly dynamic. It isn't made of fossils. It's a living, breathing record of what a people value. Every single time we speak, we are utilizing that living record. We're performing our identities, and we are participating in the constant dynamic evolution of our culture. The words we choose matter because they literally shake the very fabric of our social existence. So as you step back out into the world after this explainer, I invite you to actually listen to your own conversations. Notice your linguistic choices, and ask yourself this final, powerful question. What reality are your words building right now?